Hi, I'm Naomi Murphy, and this is the Locked Up Living podcast, where we talk with a wide range of people about harsh aspects of institutional life.
We also explore some of the ways to overcome them and to grow and develop. I'm David Jones. So join us every Wednesday morning, 6 o'clock UK time, for a fresh podcast.
So we're speaking today about some of the less visible victims of crime, the family members and loved ones of people who commit serious offences. And Rosie is a woman I first encountered on Twitter or X as she posted thoughtful entries about what it's like to love someone who's been convicted of a sex offence, and also made useful observations about re-entry into society and how we might be setting people up to fail. Rosie's husband was convicted of sexual abuse involving contact offences committed against adolescent boys committed many years earlier. Rosie and her husband had been married for over 40 years when he was arrested, and he served 5 years in prison and has recently been released, and Rosie stood by him throughout this process. So she's joining us today to tell us what she's learned on this prison journey, and having met people who have made her rethink about herself, society and our criminal justice system. Really glad to have you join us today, Rosie. Welcome.
Thank you.
Hello there, Rosie. Good to meet you. Thanks very much indeed for coming along today to talk about this very challenging set of circumstances. Rosie, what was it like for you when you first learned of your husband having committed a sexual offence?
It's quite hard still, even 6 years later, to talk about this. It's a trauma of traumas. My life changed literally in a heartbeat. My world fell apart as the man I'd loved with every fibre of my being for over 40 years admitted to cases of sexual abuse. It happened early one Saturday morning. 4 police officers, a loud knock on the door. I was still in bed. And nothing can prepare you for the shock. It felt as though I'd entered a parallel universe. My heart was broken beyond any words I can find, and my brain was barely habitable. And that hasn't really fully worn off. It's just stayed. You never get over that shock. And I don't remember an awful lot about it. I do remember grabbing the arresting officer by the shoulders and saying that whatever my husband had done, he was a really good man. I have to say the police were kind. They had a horrible job to do, but I simply couldn't believe or compute what was happening in front of my eyes. And he was taken away by 2 of the officers. By this time, another one had arrived, and so 3 were left, and they then spent the next 2 or 3 hours going through the house with a tooth comb. Every single drawer was uncovered, and even the garden sheds were gone through. And I do remember being quite ridiculous, really, and asking them how they were and would they like a cup of tea. And I don't know if I was trying to normalise what was an appallingly terrifying and traumatic time. And then they left. That was the incredible thing. They just went, and I was left not knowing what to expect next, or what do you do when your life has just ended, but somehow you're still breathing. And I didn't know if he would be released later that day. I didn't know at all. I believe things are possibly better now, but I could have really benefited from some telephone numbers or some leaflets. There are charities that can help and websites, but I knew nothing. They just literally left. That was very, very difficult.
You described there very powerfully those first hours, really, of finding out. And you used the phrase, the knock, which is a phrase we've heard before. It does seem to represent, this moment of definitive change in somebody's life. Did it kind of resonate in the rest of your life fairly quickly after that moment?
I still can't bear a loud knock, if that's what you mean. I mean, a knock on the door now. We have a doorbell too, but they didn't use that. A knock on the door will set my heart racing, my hands go clammy, I feel panicky. It's just horrible. I can't even hear a loud knock on a film without getting that back. That trauma's never left me.
Thank you. So there are some people who might suggest that committing a crime of this nature should cause you to leave your husband and have nothing more to do with him. What's your response to that?
And this is a really good question. And I really understand that some people feel that. And I want to really make clear at this point that I'm in no way minimizing what he did. What he did was terrible, and there's no getting away from that. And if people want to disagree with my reasons to stay, I also accept that. But for me, when a very good man does something really dreadful, I want to know why. And I've had this question, I've had so many people say to me, well, why didn't you go? And people have left me, friends have left me because I've stayed with him. And many believe it would have been far easier for me to walk away. For me, it wasn't like that. It wasn't easier to walk away. He'd been my rock and my love for my whole adult life. And I've come to realize that we really interpret life through the lens of our own experience. And when people say I would have walked away or I would have left my husband, it really only tells me something about their relationship. It doesn't say anything about my own relationship. And I think it's very hard for us to understand another's life. And maybe it's best if we actually didn't try. I think it's best if we understand that no two relationships are the same, and there really isn't a set formula to follow when a tragedy like this happens. And so to those who judge me and tell me what I should have done or shouldn't have done, or exactly where I've gone wrong, what I don't understand and how they would have done things differently, I say that I always did the best, the very best I knew how, always. And I've rebuilt myself so many times after every bad day, and I've chosen to live on days when it would have been easier to die. And in an unkind world, I've really tried to make it kinder. And what little strength I have has really been forged in fire. And I really wish people would respect that. It's too easy just to say, well, I think you should have gone away. It's not as black and white as that. When you've loved someone long and hard and well, you know them for so much more than their offences. That is part of their lives, yes, but it's not all of their life. And life isn't black and white, it's complex. And I think we need to reflect on our knee-jerk tendency to want to categorise a whole person's life, by something that they've done, some behaviour, however abhorrent that is. It still doesn't define the whole person. And I've seen all the good that my husband has done. He's done so much for so many people. He's changed lives for the better. He's brought so much joy into people's lives. He's been the father of my children. He was my absolute rock through our daughter's long illness, my mother's slow decline into Alzheimer's. I couldn't have managed without all of this. I can't just wipe that all out as if it never happened. And one thing I've really learned is that offences don't happen in a vacuum. There's always a backstory. And I wanted to know why such a really good man, such a really kind man, could do such appalling things. I couldn't throw away over 40 years of marriage without at least trying to find that answer. That's why I didn't walk away.
Thank you, Rosie. I think you've given a wonderful answer there. There's a phrase that often comes up in the prison therapeutic communities, that we work to see the person behind the crime. Really, it's so important to get some idea of the whole person. So, Rosie, what have been the longer term implications for you of your husband's crime? How has your life been affected?
It's been affected in such dramatic and very different ways. It's not all bad. There's been a lot that has been so bad, but I've also learnt some of the most amazing things of my whole life. I've lost a huge amount. I've lost family, friends, finances. I lost my daughter. And that's a pain that I really don't have words to describe, and only another parent can understand that. I miss her more than words can say. But I've lost my health and I've lost so much more. It was terrifying when my husband went to prison and it came out in the press. I think that was a particularly difficult time because the press are not interested in telling the truth. They twist the truth. They incite hatred. They only tell half the story. This is something I never knew. And I got anonymous letters. I got hate mail. I got vigilante threats. I can't believe, what if I'd had children, young children at home? I'm so grateful that I didn't. But this is the case for so many women, that they would have young children at home. And the lines between who is a criminal and who isn't begin to get blurred. And this was a real revelation to me. I will never read another newspaper as long as I live. And I question everything I read now anyway, or anything anyone says to me. And I'm grateful that I've learnt that truth. Those first few weeks were so hard. I was learning to live on my own for the first time in my life, and whilst dealing with immense and unspeakable grief. And I think, if my husband had been killed suddenly, I would have had so much support and people would have come round with an apple crumble or a bunch of flowers. Instead, I was getting hate mail. I didn't know I could even live on my own. I didn't know how to do that. But then there's been so much that I've learned that I'm grateful for, through this unasked for and really unexpected trauma, I've learnt who my real friends are. Oh my goodness, have I learnt, and how precious are those who are my real friends, and how surprised I am by some who have walked away. I've also discovered the astonishing loyalty of my son. Our son has stayed, and he clearly has a heart the size of a planet. And he has been my joy when I've been sad, and my strength when I've been weak. And I couldn't have done this journey without him. And his incredible partner, whose vast, beautiful heart has been a constant surprise to me. And she wrote soon after my husband's arrest saying, "I'm still proud to be part of this family." I never would have known these things. That's a beautiful thing. I've also discovered my own strengths. Now, I'm somebody who actually most of my life thought I was fairly hopeless, that I needed looking after, that I wasn't very clever, I wasn't very good at anything. But I've learned so much about actually what matters, what's important, what really matters in life. And it isn't about respectability. It isn't about what your neighbours think about you. It isn't about having a nice holiday. I've discovered that some of the best people you could ever meet are those that the rest of society has thrown away. And meeting those people has changed me. And that's a gift that I'm so grateful for. So it's been a real intense roller coaster of extreme emotions. It's been very powerful.
Yes, you've been telling us, I think, how you've lived through some, very difficult times, Rosie, although there have been brighter moments. You mentioned that you lost your daughter. Could you just tell us a bit about that, please?
She found it just too difficult, and I don't blame her. We're all very different people. And so she just left the whole family. I don't know I think there are misunderstandings, and it's too painful for her to speak about. And I have to let her go. I'm so grateful for the wonderful years we had together. I'll never forget that. I have a jar of memories that I put in. I've written it on little scraps of beautiful origami paper of every single memory that I have, and they still keep coming. They're little memories, they're big memories, and I write them on these little scraps of paper and I put them in the jar. And when I miss her unbearably, I hold the jar and I know that it was real. No one can ever take that. And I hope that she's okay. And people say, oh, she'll come back one day. That's a platitude. I don't know that. And they don't know that. And I wish they wouldn't say that. But in a way, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter because that connection can never be broken. Love is an energy that can never die. And I think at some level, she must know that I still love her so much. And I think that nothing beautiful is ever lost. And when I hold that jar, I know that. I know that in my heart. Everything beautiful and everything that is to do with love is never lost. In some way, it's written in eternity. And that comforts me. But it has been one of the greatest griefs of all. And little memories, they'll ambush me without my expecting it. I'll open a drawer and there'll be something she made for me. And then suddenly this unspeakable grief washes over me. In some ways, if she died and I'd lost her that way, I'd have known that she died loving me. I don't know if she loves me anymore. I don't know. And that's often the hardest thing. But I love her, and that's what
Yes.
matters.
Thank you so much for sharing that with us, Rosie. So, when your husband went to prison, how long did he go for? Was he the first person you'd known who'd been to prison?
Yes. Yes. I'd watched television programs about people going to prison, never really thought about it. You never think this can happen to you, but my goodness, it can. And sentencing was so painful. It was actually postponed twice. I mean, that was so painful. I don't know how many times you can watch your husband pack a suitcase to go to prison, to spend that night lying awake holding hands, to say goodbye at the courts, and then have to bring him home again. And know you've got to go through it all over again because the police hadn't got some paperwork ready. I found that terribly hard. But then the final sentencing did eventually happen. And he got a much longer sentence than I think we were expecting. And it was a terrible shock to watch him taken down. Terrible, terrible, terrible shock. I was taken to a side room and I absolutely bawled my eyes out, and then drove home to the emptiest house I've ever known. It was very hard.
Thanks, Rosie. You've got a very powerful way with words. What was it like going to visit him in prison? You know, it's not something that had been part of your family history.
Prison visits, that's the thing. They're very challenging. For a start, even trying to book a prison visit, I don't know if it's got easier, but you had to ring the booking visit line, and you weren't in a queue or anything. You just had to ring the number over and over again until you got through or until your finger wore out. There was one occasion where I actually rung that number repeatedly for 4 solid hours. I mean, that was a very difficult thing to do. You could do it online, but it wasn't always reliable. And I once witnessed somebody turned away because she had her confirmation with her, but there'd been some mistake and she traveled halfway across the country with 2 small children. I thought, I'm never doing that. So I always dreaded doing the ringing thing. That was a challenge. But my very first time I went, I was so scared because it's such an alien environment and being searched felt terrifying. I was suddenly sure that I'd accidentally put a mobile phone down my sock, or, I had accidentally put a knife in my pocket, or I was afraid that my fear, the sniffer dog would somehow smell and mistake for Class A drugs. All these thoughts went through my head. And then you have to leave your belongings in a locker. And there was this girl. Yeah, she was loud. I'd heard her coming, and I judged her. And I thought, I hope she doesn't sit next to me in the waiting room. She was just very loud, and she had scars where she'd cut herself and needle marks in her arms, and an aroma about her that implied that she hadn't washed possibly ever. But she saw me struggling. I couldn't even get the key in the locker. And she came over and she put her arm around me. And she said, "It's your first time, isn't it?" She said, "I'll look after you." And I had judged her. And yet she hadn't judged me, in spite of the fact I was obviously from a very different world to her. I feel so ashamed, but I will never forget Mandy. She was the beginning of really breaking my heart open to a different world. I've been brought up like a little princess, I realise. I didn't know these people. I didn't know them. And now I not only know them, I love them. And there is love by the bucket load in those waiting rooms as we wait to be led through to the visiting hall. And there are no barriers because we're all there for the same reason. And I look around me and I see the well-to-do and the crack addicts and the travellers and everything in between. Strangers with exhausted faces and walking sticks or bright clothes or plastic jewellery or smart outfits or tattered t-shirts and tattoos and hearts broken open and stories to tell. And they're a mixed army of broken-hearted light bearers. And I'm really aware, I'm overwhelmed with the knowledge that we belong to one another and that our lives are woven together. And we have so much to teach each other. And the main lesson is that love is so much bigger than any grim, bleak horror that can be thrown at us. We can do hard things. I'm in debt to every single one of them for showing me how vast compassion can be. It was extraordinary in those visiting halls. I'll never forget the sight of fathers being introduced to their brand new babies and seeing them for the first time ever. It's so moving. There's more happiness in there and love than in any other cafe I've ever been in. I thought perhaps people might be there going, "Well, you've left me with the kids and the debts and the this, that, and it's just not like that." It's just people being happy to be together again. There was one lovely lady I met. Another example was a traveller lady with tattoos all up her arms and life scars. And she was a traveller, and my embarrassingly middle-class accent and her beautiful Romany accent would have at one time made communication quite difficult. In fact, we probably wouldn't have bothered. But in this strange liminal world of a visiting hall waiting room, you just talk. And she told me that both her husband and her son were in the prison. And I said to her, "How on earth do you cope?" And she said, "You just have to keep loving them." And I've never forgotten that. I was bowled over by this beautiful comment and her beautiful heart. And it reminded me, I don't know who said this, but love is the answer. Now, what's your question? And when I saw her later with her son, love was certainly flowing between them. So maybe it was her. But to love someone in prison means that there are places where you are not welcome, and society will really judge you for it. You have to be faithful to your own integrity and know that you're fierce, you're brave, and that you're enough. Because those 2 precious hours will go very quickly. And it's so painful when one of the prison officers will say, "There's just 5 minutes left," and you have to say goodbye. And my back is always aching from leaning forward, trying to breathe in the air that he's breathed. And then you have that last hug. And then you're all herded back out through the corridors and out into the car parks, and you disappear off into the night and long journeys, and you rejoin lives where you no longer fully belong, where we're often judged and misunderstood and shunned, and yet our only crime is to love someone. And Reverend Desmond Tutu once said, "A person becomes a person through other people." And I have never understood that until now. And the people that I've encountered on these visits, and just generally on this whole prison journey, are among the most noble, loving, and courageous I have ever met. And they have helped me to become a better person and a more complete human being. I'm grateful for that.
Thank you, Rosie. I mean, it's really very powerful to hear you talking about that experience of visiting, and I can hear that a lot of the anxiety and pain was what you were bringing to the prison on those visits. But I wondered if there was anything that the prison service could have done that would have made it easier for you, any support that could have been available that would make life perhaps a little bit less stressful for visitors.
I didn't know what to expect on that first visit, and it would have made a huge difference if I'd been told what to expect. But there was absolutely nothing. And this is going back 6 years, maybe it is different now, or 5.5 years. But information, leaflets, whatever. At the last prison that my husband was at, which was an open prison, there was a PACT representative. PACT is Prison Advice and Care Trust, and they are a phenomenal charity. And there was always this lovely, welcoming person. It made a massive difference. If there was somebody like that at every prison, it would really, really help. And she'd be there afterwards as well. There was one occasion when I left prison and I was really deeply upset. It was the first time I'd seen my husband after a long period of COVID when you couldn't visit prisons. And I was so traumatized and shocked by the change in him. I realized he'd developed Parkinson's, and I came out in pieces. I was actually sick in the car park, and she spotted me. She took me under her wing and she looked after me, and she said, "You're not driving home like that." And she gave me so much support. But something like that, I think, should be at every prison. That would have made a huge difference. But for me, I had to do all the work on my own and all the research. I was completely alone. I just didn't know what to expect.
No, it sounds really, really difficult. And I suppose something else that comes to mind is, part of the criminal. We know that a massive factor in how people manage to refrain from further offending is the quality of their relationships with family members. And I'm struck by the immense trauma that you must have gone through in discovering your husband's offences, and wondered whether you were ever offered any work to address the impact on the relationship between you. I mean, it's not a crime that could possibly not have affected you.
There was no support whatsoever. And I always felt that everything was made really difficult to maintain that relationship. It was only my stubbornness and my huge love for him, which wasn't a choice, by the way. We don't choose to love someone. You just do. Love chooses us. And I wish people would understand that, because I've also been told, well, you've chosen this path, you've chosen to love him. I didn't. I've tried to unlove him. Believe me, I've really tried. But I don't know where the off switch is. So it was partly my stubbornness, partly my love for him that kept me going. But there was nothing that helped maintain that relationship. And we did need to talk so much about the causes of the crime, where that left us, how we were going to move forward. And yet, for so much of that time, there were no private conversations. Phone calls were only 10 minutes. You couldn't even get upset on a phone call, because you knew that would be so awful. Then the end of the phone call would suddenly come, and then if you were upset, you knew the other person would be left hanging. It was just, You couldn't have real conversations even. I don't know how relationships survive, yet somehow it's love and determination that makes it survive. There should be more support to encourage those relationships to survive.
I think you're spot on. And the service that I used to lead, we used to occasionally do family therapy sessions to enable people to improve, to work on hurts within the relationship. Typically, it tended to actually be obviously the adult children wanting to make amends and repair things with parents. But when you think about the cost of building prisons, you think it'd be far more robust interventions to put the effort into helping people have better relationships, which also there's the harm that's been caused to you. It's not just about stopping your husband from reoffending, but in any case like this, but also helping families heal, have better relationships. That could also help children potentially if you've got children that are being raised by two parents where there's a fractured relationship. It just seems like that would be so much more cost effective than, get a bit tired of hearing we're building so many more prison places for prisons that can't, when they haven't got the staff to staff them. When far better to try and think about some of the other ways that you could work with people to heal the ruptures within society, really.
I think everything you say, Naomi, I totally agree with. It's absolute common sense what you say. And I've realised that common sense doesn't come into anything to do with our criminal justice service. I've really, really realised that. Logic and common sense just doesn't exist.
So, Rosie, your husband served his sentence and was released and returned home. How has that gone?
It's been one of the hardest parts of all, and I'm shocked by that. He's been released now for 2.5 months, and it's been the hardest 2.5 months. I mean, it has been as hard as, maybe not obviously as the actual arrest, but the year that he was under investigation was incredibly hard. Sentencing was unbelievably hard. Release has been on a par with that. It shocked me because now my resilience is lower. I've been through an awful lot. I'm tired. I'm worn out. I wasn't expecting this bit to be so hard. The whole prison journey was one endless struggle. My husband was actually diagnosed with cancer 2 days before sentencing, just to throw in an extra thing. And he had to have, it was supposed to be an urgent operation. He had to wait 7 months for that because of staff and prisons. And that was all really traumatic. And then, of course, there was COVID, and then he got Parkinson's. And then finally we get to release. He had been at an open prison for 2 years before release, and he had been coming home every month, for 4 nights and 5 days. And then they were great. He would come home, and I think that was an important part. I was thinking this is a good sign. This is part of rehabilitation, and I think that was important. But then just a few weeks before he was finally released, so in December, he was released at the end of January, he was told he had really extensive exclusion zones put into place. Now, nobody had prepared us for this at all, and it came as a big shock. I understand that the exclusion zones are to prevent any victims accidentally coming into contact with him. And whilst I totally understand that victims don't want to bump into the person who's caused them harm, I am confused by the fact that it didn't matter at all for the previous 19 months when he could go anywhere. And also I'm confused by the fact that they don't actually live locally. I felt this was more punitive than preventative. And the exclusion zones were such that he could no longer access his doctor's surgery, and he's got complex medical needs. He can't get to the local hospital or the A&E or the dentist or the Parkinson's support group. The nearest chemist is 12 miles away. I mean, and he doesn't drive. All of this falls on my shoulders. Even going for a walk means I've got to drive him somewhere. He can't walk all that far, but for a couple of miles, I might have to do like a 16-mile round trip just so that he can walk for a couple of miles. I'm massively punished by these exclusion zones. It's affected me enormously, and it's as if he's under house arrest. I was so worried about his health and the fact that he couldn't access medical care. I wrote to my MP. I never got a response. I wrote to Primary Care England. They couldn't help. I rang charities, prison charities, who kept saying, you have to challenge this. We've challenged it. We've tried. Nothing, absolutely no leeway at all. We still haven't even got clear maps of the exclusion zones. We've now been asking for clear maps for 4 months, and we still haven't got any maps that make any sense. This is so stressful. And my husband has Parkinson's, but also cognitive problems. He can't, and he needs a lot of help. He is isolated, ostracized, lonely, depressed. Probation have created exactly the environment that has been shown to lead to reoffending. Not that my husband would ever reoffend, we know that, but the principle is there. That's what probation have created. Are they interested in protecting children? Are they interested in rehabilitation? No, it's all about punishment. Rehabilitation doesn't exist. It's a lie. I'm really upset about it. He can't even go to church. I mean, I think that's against human rights, actually. His faith has always been very important to him. He has always been a churchgoer all through prison. He took a very active part. He was a chapel orderly, took an active part in the church services. But since leaving prison, he can't even go to church because of the exclusion zones. Our local parish priest, however, brought the Eucharist out to the house so that he could have it here. But the diocesan safeguarding officer found out about this and said he's not allowed to have the Eucharist brought to his house because it's not safe, apparently, unless he and the priest sign a document. Now, my husband was not prepared to sign a document that he didn't understand. He couldn't understand why it's not safe for an elderly priest to bring him communion in his own home. It didn't make any sense to him, but it's been another loss. There's nothing. What is left? You know, if he was to be taken back into prison, it would actually be so much better for both of us. And that's a terrible, terrible thing to say. And it utterly breaks my heart. It really does. But I am buckling under the pressure of being his emotional support, his driver, his social life, his everything. In prison, he was very sociable. He had literally hundreds of friends. He had the chapel. He even had better health care. It's been a terrible shock. Why was nobody preparing me for this? You know, when he first started coming home for his monthly home visits, so that was almost 2 years ago, probation came to look at the house to say whether this was okay for him to come back to, and his personal police officer as well. Somebody could have said to me then, you do realise that there may be some exclusion zones put into place and that this could be quite a difficulty for you. But I wasn't prepared in any way at all. And that was a terrible shock to me. But there's no alternative now. There is no alternative.
Yes, it does sound terrible. I imagine they only got round to thinking about it at the last moment, and then it's an example of defensive practice, making sure that nobody could, in the final analysis, be held responsible if things went wrong. But it sounds as if what you're describing suggests that it's harder for your husband to rehabilitate himself in these circumstances?
I feel it's impossible. My husband is a very positive, upbeat man, and it's horrible to watch him depressed. And because of the cognitive problems, he needs social interaction. When he was in the prison, his neurologist recommended exercise because apparently it's one of the best things for Parkinson's. So he was going to the gym 4 times a week, and it was amazing. Even his medication was reduced because it had such a big impact. The doctor said in the prison, when you leave, you must carry this on, but he can't. He can't access any local gym. We did find a gym that's nearly 10 miles away, and I was going to try and get him there 3 times a week. Even though I work and I have my own health issues, it was important enough to me to do that. And probation waited until we'd paid the subscription, he'd bought himself some nice new gym shoes, and then they said, no, you're not allowed to do that because there'll be some safeguarding or something. I mean, he was going at a time, it wasn't on his license condition that he couldn't do that. It seems to me that probation is all about putting up blocks. It's all about telling you what you can't do, but it's not about telling you what you can do. I think it would be more helpful if they said, you can't do that, but you can do this. But it's not that. It's, no, you can't do that. No, you can't do that. No, you can't do that. Until in the end, you can't do anything. That's not helpful for anybody. It doesn't help protect children.
So it sounds from what you're saying as if these restrictions don't really do anything to reduce somebody's risk.
They do nothing to reduce anybody's risk. I can't see the point. I understand that victims don't want to bump into someone who's hurt them, but I feel this whole thing should be risk assessed. I've lived here in these surroundings day in and day out. I haven't gone anywhere. I haven't even gone on holiday. I've never bumped into one of the victims or any of their family. We're not asking to hang about in the pubs or go into the local town and the high street and the shops. We just need him to be able to access a GP or the local hospital or a Parkinson's support group or go to a quiet gym at a time when there are just a handful of other elderly people there. That's all we're asking. To be able to go to church occasionally would be a bonus, or even to have the Eucharist brought to him. That would also be a bit of a bonus. We're not asking for very much. These are basic human rights. And a strange thing happened. It does make you wonder. It feels so contradictory, but there was a funeral in the village where we live, and it was the father of one of the victims. And so they all piled into the village. We weren't given any warning of this. We could have just walked into them. But it seems strange if we're told it is so important that you don't bump into them, that you can't go anywhere, not even the hospital or the A&E, but they can come to you right past your front door whenever they choose to. I'm confused. It's mixed messages. It doesn't make sense. And yet the guidance to the exclusion zones and license conditions say that these must be proportionate. I don't feel they are proportionate, but it doesn't seem to matter. They can write anything in the guidance and it ticks the box. Okay, we've said that. Isn't that wonderful? Doesn't mean to say it has to happen, though. Let's just make it punitive instead. I can really see why people go back into prison. It's heartbreaking.
Thank you, Rosie. Well, I think you've been at the end really of a system which is poorly designed and creaking really through lack of support and lack of manpower. And I must say, just in support of probation officers, because I come into contact with many very well intentioned probation officers who are equally unhappy with the kind of situation that you describe.
It's good. It's nice to hear you say that, and important that you say that. And actually, our probation officer, I think, is kind, but I think it's the system that's broken. Our probation officer, I think, is She means well and she wants to help people, but she's completely stuck by the whole system.
So, Rosie, you've obviously spent a lot of time thinking about your husband and supporting him, but we can also hear that it's been really painful for you. How are you looking after yourself, and what would you advise other people in your shoes to do?
I think these days there is help available, and there are forums, there are websites, there's support that wasn't available 6 years ago. And so obviously look out for that. Find people in your situation, because there are so many, so many. I thought I was the only one. I felt like such a freak. But that's definitely something that's got better. So my first bit of advice would be to use whatever help there is, to get on forums, to talk to people. But I still feel the bottom line is that you've got to find the resilience in you to be your own rescuer. You know, this is an opportunity to actually dig deep and to be your own best friend. And everything that happens in life, it can either be an opportunity or it can be a complete disaster. And I often feel grateful that I read the book by Viktor Frankl, I think Man's Search for Meaning, where he says that the one thing that can never be taken away from us is our choice in how we react in any set of circumstances. And you really do, when something like this happens, you sink or swim. And if you choose to swim, you will be surprised at how much you will learn about yourself, about life, about the things that are important. There are certain, obviously, useful tips, like evenings are a difficult time. I used to find evenings the hardest time. It's important to have a plan, be your own best friend in the evenings, be kind to yourself. It all sounds cliched, but it's so important. Weekends, don't be ambushed by weekends. The week has more structure. We've got like recycling on a certain day, or we've got work or something, and your exhausted mind and body might long for Saturdays and Sundays, but those are the days that can catch you out, because you'll see all around you happy families and you'll think of all that you've lost and all that could be, if only. So don't be ambushed by weekends. Have a plan. I know it sounds a stupid tip, but I would also say be careful with music. I've had to leave shops in floods of tears because some background music has come on that just triggers me. I choose not to listen to music because it can upset me so deeply and for such a long time. Also have phone numbers of people you can call, and that may even include the Samaritans. I've used them more than once. And I'm so touched that someone that you've never met and you're never going to meet is prepared to give up their time and their sleep to sit with you until you're strong enough to breathe again on your own. And that's a beautiful thing. So use tools like that. Also, to take one moment at a time. People say take one day at a time. I think that's too big a chunk, quite honestly. Take one moment at a time. Just one moment is often enough. And look around you. There are beautiful things around you if you stop panicking long enough to see it. Bananas, a picture of your grandson, anything. There'll be something there to focus on, to hinge you. And I particularly love this understatement, really, by Alain de Botton. He says, you usually have to be bashed about a bit by life to see the point of daffodils, sunsets, and uneventful nice days. It's so true. And love yourself as if you are your favourite person, because actually you might just be all you've got sometimes. And don't run away. I know that some people might have a different view on that, but my particular thing that's worked for me is not to run away, because although Somalia might sound tempting, your troubles will follow you, and you are stronger than you think. And you have to keep telling yourself and to know that. Don't ever allow your thoughts of it wasn't meant to be like this, because it is, and you can't change it. Acceptance is a more peaceful place. And this raw, fractured, agonizing pain is your reality right now. It simply is. Crying is really good. It releases cortisol. I do a lot of it. It's very dehydrating, so drink lots of water. But yeah, I mean, you'd be surprised how strong you can be. And then you've taken something positive from it all. Does that make sense?
Thank you so much, Rosie. That was a really generous conversation. The fact that you was prepared to go into so much stuff that's been really, times that have been really, really difficult, and hopefully other people can benefit from hearing your story, or perhaps have a change of perspective if they're coming from a different place. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes. Thank you, Rosie. I won't say it's been a pleasure talking with you because you've got a very painful story to tell, but it's an important story and you raise crucial issues, really, which I don't think society is quite ready to talk about, except in the most kind of banal manner. But thank you very much for doing it.
Thank you both very much indeed for letting me talk.
Very powerful, Rosie.